Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're all well rested. And I see that you're all up early. Thank you for being here. This morning, we have the Nathan Cole here with us leading this masterclass. Nathan Cole was a longtime member of the International Staff Band, as well as a band member of the Bristol Easton. Is that pronounced right?
That's
Bristol
right,
Easton
Bristol Easton.
band in the UK, which is a very notable core band. We were talking earlier about some familiar friends, I guess we know from that group. So it's been a pleasure talking with him, and I'm sure you guys are going to learn something great this morning from him. I'm just going to go right ahead and turn it over to you, Nathan, and just begin. And we look forward to hearing.
Sure. Well, thank you, Cashus. Thank you, Martyn. And first thing to say is it's great to be here joining with you as part of CMI. And I personally have fond memories of the Central Territory, having come across to your territory, I think way back in 2008 with the International Staff Band. Had a great time in your territory and shared with the Chicago Staff Band at the Symphony Center. Had a great concert there together with a fantastic band that you have there. And it's just been good to talk with you guys just briefly this morning and just catch up on things. So I hope you've had a great week. And really what I want to do today is share my personal experience of playing the timpani and just go through some of the characteristics of the instrument itself, playing the instrument, tuning the instrument, some common techniques. And then I want to leave some time at the end of the session, a good period of time for us to look at some musical excerpts and just discuss any kind of questions and feedback and input from you guys. And it's great to see so many of you on the call. Because this is really a two-way process. And if I would encourage you, if you have questions as we go through on some of the topics that I'm kind of delving into, then feel free to raise your hand or put a comment in the chat box. And then we'll just follow that up as we go through the session. But I really want this to be helpful for you. But like I said, it's really coming from my perspective, and we're going to talk about some of the playing characteristics and the things that go through my head when I'm playing the timpani. And of course, I am approaching this very much from a kind of Salvation Army brass band and traditional brass band background. But it's important to note that a lot of my training as a percussionist took place outside of the Salvation Army. So I'm going to try and impart some of the things that I think are really relevant to playing the instrument, which come from beyond the brass band and certainly come from beyond the Salvation Army. But what I would say is that if you're all involved as percussionists in your Salvation Army bands right now, usually outside of COVID, but you have a band that you play in, you have a percussion section that you play in, perhaps you're a member of the Chicago Staff Band, perhaps you're a member of another band in the area. It's so important to use the time that you have with the brass band very wisely, because you get a lot of contact time, you get a lot of playing time with the instrument, more so than you would with perhaps some of the orchestral situations that you find yourself in. So it's a great opportunity to play the instrument regularly. But what I want to do is impart some of the things that I think you can apply to that situation. So a good place to start really is just a brief history of the instrument, a little bit of a backstory of why we have the drums that we have today. Now, the timpani, of course, are probably the oldest form of percussion instruments, definitely one of the oldest forms of percussion instruments. And the very basic form of these instruments, and I'm talking about literally a skin, a head, and a bowl, and perhaps they were sat on some wooden stilts or plinths. It really dates back to the early part of the 13th century in Western Europe. So these instruments, they came about and they arrived in Western parts of Europe all those many years ago. And to begin with, they were kind of ceremonial drums. So they were used very basically, very simply. There wasn't a lot of technique involved. The players didn't have to be masters of their instrument. It was very, very simple in terms of hitting the drum and making a noise. And these drums in the early days were used very much part of the military setting or the royal court setting. They were used to mark battles. They were used to mark information giving. They were there to announce things in the community. Um, as the years went on, they became a little bit more involved in more traditional, what we would know as ensemble music. And I fast forward several hundreds of years here, but we go to composers such as Bach, Vivaldi, Handel, those Baroque composers in the early classical musical era in terms of Baroque music. And you would find those instruments being played with those composers and music such as Handel's Messiah and Vivaldi's Gloria, different types of musical settings right back in that time. And it's at that point, really, that the instrument really becomes more standardized within the orchestral music setting. So from that point all the way through the history of certainly orchestral music, and then eventually into band music, and I'm talking concert band, wind band music, brass band music, you'd see that whole period, just the instrument would become more involved and more developed. And then when you get to, in terms of the orchestral music, when you get to composers such as Mozart and very much particularly Beethoven, Beethoven really advanced the writing for the timpani. And when I was a student, I literally went from Symphony 1 to Symphony 9, and I went through each of those different symphonies. And each symphony displayed new advances, new techniques for the instrument, new sounds and requirements and colors that the instrument really demanded from the player. So it was that period there, really the 18th century through to where we are now, a huge development of the instrument until what we have today. And of course, timpani today could be regarded as quite grand instruments, quite bold. They look great. We've got a set of Adams timpani here, and they've got plastic heads, they've got copper bowls, and pedals on each of these drums. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. But that's just a brief backstory of the instrument and how now these instruments are very much involved within the orchestra, within the brass band. The demands on the player are really, really quite great these days. And we'll just talk a little bit about what is involved with that as we go through. So just the basics of the instruments. You'll see that I have 4 Adams instruments here today, and you will find that there's a standardized size for the drums. And this particular set, I've got a 32-inch drum on my left here. That's the lowest and biggest drum that I have. 32-inch, 29-inch, 26-inch, and a 23-inch just here. So you'll see, hopefully on this video, but also just from your own personal knowledge, that you've got a large drum on the left and you get gradually to the smaller and higher pitched drums on the right. If you don't know already, these drums are pitched. Really important that you realize that. These are pitched drums. So we're not talking about snare drums or tom-toms or a bass drum where it's an unpitched sound. These drums are pitched. And as you play them, you will hear different pitches. And I've just tuned these drums to actually, I've got a G, an A, a D, and an F. And I just want you to hear the various pitches as I move from the lowest drum, the biggest drum, up to the highest drum. Okay, and then coming back down. So just hearing that, we're literally going from low pitch to high pitch and then back down again. The drum heads or the skins on these instruments are plastic, and they're the most durable, the most steady in terms of pitch. They're the most reliable drum heads that you'll find for timpani. As you get to the professional symphony orchestra level, you'll find that you'll have calf skins or even goat skin drum heads, and they're much more temperamental depending on the temperature of the room. If you're playing outside, the moisture, the humidity in the air is going to alter the pitch of those drum heads. With these plastic heads, they're very reliable. They're also, they're pretty durable as well. So they're the best ones really to have for brass bands, I find in my experience. And they're really reliable for pitch as well. So they're a good thing to have and just keep maintaining. They're good to clean. So when you come to changing your heads, you want to go for another set of plastic heads. Within plastic heads, there's also different types of plastic heads that you can get. Clear, white heads, or these are Renaissance, or you guys say Renaissance. So there are different types of heads which create different types of sounds. So that's just an important little bit of technical history to the heads and really what your options are in terms of how you play your instruments. Moving on to pedal actions. So on these drums, and you can't see the pedal here, but they're balanced pedal action. So what happens with the pedal is that it's there to change the pitch of the drum. So if you're less experienced with these instruments, one of the things you'll want to do very early on in your practice regime is getting used to moving the pedal up and down and changing pitches between the two drums. So just an example of how this works. If I use my heel and I push the heel all the way back, then I'm going to get to the lowest pitched point on this drum. So on the 32-inch drum here, I'm really very low right at the bottom of the drum. And this is what it would sound like. Okay, it's a beautiful low note there on the 32. And then as I push the pedal using my toes, pushing the pedal forwards, the pitch on that drum is going to go up. So hopefully you heard that pitch change from low to high. And then, of course, I can move up stepwise, which gives me the very defined particular notes as I move through the instrument. So an E, F, G, A. So I can change those notes as I go through. So I would be just looking to practice my pedaling, and maybe I would choose a C and a G between the two low drums. Then I might change to B flat and F. And that's just a very simple exercise. I can move from C and G to B flat and F and just change those pitches on two drums. And that just helps me practice. Maybe it's a little warm-up routine for you, just to practice between those two pitches. So C and G. Just moving between those two drums just helps your ears to warm up, your hands to warm up, and your feet to warm up, and just moving around the drums like that. Just so some other simple things to think about when I'm setting the drums up. Where the music stand goes, where your stool goes, and where you position yourself. Okay, this is my personal perspective. I like the music stand to be obviously within the middle of the two drums, right in the center of the setup here. And the reason for that is several reasons, really. One, obviously, I can see the music. My head is facing the music stand. And I look to set the drums up, obviously, so I can see the conductor. Really, really important. When you go into a rehearsal, when you go into, you're going into your first situation with a band rehearsal. Maybe it's a new band. Maybe it's CMI, and you're in there with a new band. You've got a new conductor, and these are the things that I'd want to think about. So I'd want to set my drums up, and this is me personally. I like to sit between the bass trombone and the E-flat bass in that corner of the band. And the reason for that is that actually musically, I interact a lot with the bass trombone. I also interact a lot with the tuba section, more so with the E-flat basses and also with the B-flat basses. But that is this corner of the band where musically I relate a lot to. So I want to be able to hear what the bass trombones are doing. I want to hear what the tubas are doing. And the cornets, of course, are blowing over the top of the band. So I can hear, what's going on, often melodically, and that comes across at the band. But really, I'm placed in that bottom end section of the band, in that corner of the band. So I want to have the stand in front of me. I want to be able to see the conductor. And one of the things I recommend is when you go into a band room for the first time, you're with a conductor, eyeball the conductor, be able to see them, before that rehearsal starts, look up and eyeball and have that contact. So you're starting that communication between the conductor and yourself as the timpanist. It just sets you in the right position, and the conductor knows you're there, and he's aware of the kind of overall surroundings of where you're sat in the band room. Then, of course, I want to make sure that my stool is at the right height. I prefer to sit down as I play. One of the reasons for that is it makes pedaling a whole lot easier. We talked about tuning and pedaling. So it puts me right in the middle of the drums, and I can move easily around the timpani set like this. So that just helps that situation. Then I'd also want to make sure that my stick tray, wherever that might want to be, your trap tray, I like it to be at the back here, so it's out of the way. Sometimes you'll see people with trap trays over the drums like here or over here. The issue with that is it actually does affect the sound. And I've also been in situations where sticks have dropped off of the stand and fallen onto the drum head, and that's created a whole load of noise. So actually, I keep it back here, out the way, and that seems to me to be the safest place to keep my trap tray and all my mallets back here. Uh, General maintenance and care of the instrument, just one of these final general characteristics that I want to talk about. These instruments are very expensive and you need to really look after them. And that means when you're playing them, you look after them when you're playing them, but when you're transporting them, when you're moving them around the band room, and often other members of the band won't necessarily understand how to look after these instruments. And before I've had cornet players come and put their cornet down on one of the drum heads, or there'll be a whole load of music put on the drum head, or someone would come by and just tap the drum because they think it's a good idea. Don't let that happen. Protect your drums. They're not a table, all right? The timpani is not a table. You'll often see a sign in storage rooms, things like that. Really look after these instruments. If you put things on the instruments, it damages not only the head, but it damages the rim and the hoop and all the other parts of the drum, and that's expensive to replace. Another consideration, when you're moving these instruments, you want to make sure that you have the covers on, and if you have a flight case to transport the instruments on a truck or a van, that's even better. You wouldn't put a cornet on a van or a truck in the middle and then just put a whole load of stuff on top of it, or a trombone. Even though as tempting as that is, you don't want to do that. You actually want to look after the instruments, keep them safe, and then they'll last for a long time. These instruments actually will last for 20, 30 years, easy, if you look after them. So it's a really good investment to look after the maintenance and the overall flight cases and any sort of protective covers is really, really good to have for that. So I'm going to move on. If there's any other questions on sort of general characteristics and storage and just general setup of the instrument, then do put something in the chat and we can come back to that. But what I'd like to do is move on to actually talking about playing the instrument. And so this involves things around mallet choice, beating spots on the drum. We're going to talk a little bit about grips, technical approach, and fundamental strokes. So the basic sort of playing aspects of the instrument. Now you'll see from back here, if you can see that on the camera, I have a whole load of different mallets here. These are felt mallets, but I also have some flannel head mallets. I've got some wooden sticks as well, some wooden mallets. And they're all designed to create different sounds and different effects on the instrument. Now, if you're a new percussionist and you're coming into a band for the first time, or maybe you've just been playing for a couple of years, I wouldn't expect you to go out and buy a whole load of mallets, okay? But you could talk to your percussion teacher or talk to even some other members of the percussion section and say, hey, I'm new to this. What can you recommend? And in the beginning, I'd recommend that you probably get maybe three different types of sticks. And in general, maybe some hardish, medium, and soft sticks, okay, in general. But we'll go into that a little bit further because that's not always the case of the sort of sticks that we want to be using. But it does give you some options, and it gives you a way to access the instrument and the repertoire, giving you a whole range of things to be able to play. But these sticks I had made when I played for my band in the UK. I used to be the timpanist for the Corey band in Wales, and when I joined the band, I had some sticks made for me, and these are made by Roft. Now, I highly recommend going onto the Roft Mallets website, and you'll be able to find them, and they will make sticks or mallets to your liking. Now, you'll notice from these mallets that they're actually quite thin shafts. I prefer that because my fingers are quite nimble and a little bit thin, so I prefer that. And they're quite light as well. So there's obviously different weights and different heads in the mallet as well. The head of the stick, you can have wooden cores or cork cores or even textile cores in the center of these mallet heads, mallet tops here. And so that is going to change the weight and the sound of the stick on the drum. Now, these are actually cork and wood. I've got a mixture of cork and wood cores in these sticks. And what that does is certainly with the core stick, with the wooden cores, is that enables me to get quite a heavy articulated sound, but without it being too loud. Okay, so just an example on that. If I just play with these sticks. These are some of my favorite sticks. These are actually made by the timpanist of the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra in Manchester in England, a guy called Paul Turner. These are great sticks. And what they do is they create a lot of articulation without me playing too loud. Now, what I did at the end there is I played that roll, and hopefully that demonstrated that besides with all the articulation that I can get with these sticks, when I play a roll, I can also get it to be quite round and silky smooth. Okay, so that's quite nice to have that effect, to be able to play rhythmically and with articulation, but then when it's needed, I can provide that round sound as well for the rolls. So going on to the other types of sticks, I've got some other felt sticks here. So these are actually really quite large heads on the sticks here, and they create a very big round sound. And it's important to have in your head what sort of sound quality you're going to need for the instrument. Whatever repertoire you're playing, it's really important to have an idea in your head, a concept, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we delve into some repertoire. But of course, the purpose of having all these sticks is to create different types of sounds and colors. So this is with the really sort of quite large and heavier soft felt sticks. Okay, so that gives me a nice big round sound. And often I tend to use these actually when it's quite loud. And we'll come back to that in a minute because there's several reasons why sometimes you want to use softer sticks for playing louder and sometimes harder sticks for playing quieter. Let's move on to a different type of stick. These are flannel head sticks, okay, a little bit like what you might wash your face with in the bathroom. And these are great for articulate playing. So if I'm going to sit in an orchestra and play something like Tchaikovsky or maybe Dvorak, even Rimsky-Korsakov, these are really nice for playing with nice articulation, but weight behind the sound as well. Okay, they're beautiful sticks, and they're not heavy, they're not loud, but they give me the opportunity to be weighty, but very clean and articulate as well. So I really like those. And then just finally, I've got some wooden sticks here, which I'll demonstrate. And if we go right back to when the instruments were part of the early Baroque orchestras, these drums would be smaller and they would actually be played with wooden sticks. The timpanist would go default back to wooden sticks. And of course, it would always be quite sort of simple in its approach to the instrument as well. They would usually just be to be limited to tonic and dominant, playing a major fourth on the drums. And so these sticks are great for that sort of playing. It's very simple, articulate, but light and breezy playing. And they're also really good for demonstrating phrasing. You don't have to work too hard with these sticks at all, but if you refer back to, say, the Hallelujah chorus, it's just really nice to demonstrate that phrasing, and you can go in and then back off again, and it's really obvious with wooden sticks. If we even move into the 20th century with wooden sticks, you may know Holst's Mars from the Planet Suite. And he writes for 2 sets of timpani, but the opening of that Mars movement starts with the timpani with wooden sticks, and it creates a very different type of effect, quite an eerie, distant, but also close effect at the same time. So having wooden sticks is really useful for certain effects. some contemporary composers as well will write for wooden sticks, and you'll often have to delve into the music and look at the score of the band or the orchestra really closely to understand what sort of sound the composer is looking for, because it wouldn't be necessarily something like it was back in the Baroque era, where it's just very rhythmic and phrase orientated. It could be something very, very different. So yeah, so there's some options there for sticks. And let's just go on and talk a little bit now about beating spots on the instrument. Now, beating spots, every set of instruments, you're going to have a different sweet spot on all the drums. Okay, so what I would suggest, if you're at CMI and you're playing on the instruments that you've got at CMI and you've not played them before, it's a really good idea, and I would do this anyway, if any rehearsal, get into the band room early. Okay, get into the band room early, and you'll need to look at the drums, set them up like we've talked about, before you even tune, but you might want to just sit down and just find one note on one drum and discover where the beating spot is and the sweet spot is on the drum. Okay, now some people who have never played the instrument might approach the instrument and say, right, I'm going to play the timpani and I'm going to play it right in the center. That's not where you play the instrument, okay? Please avoid that at all costs. So I'm just going to demonstrate moving from the outer edge of the drum, moving into the middle of the drum, and just you'll be able to hear the different sounds that are achieved by playing in a different beating spot. So hopefully you would have heard those different sounds as we move through the drum. Now, on this drum here, I think the sweet spot is about 3 inches in from the rim. And I would go around the instruments and just find where those beating spots may be. Now, you will find, as we go through the next couple of things in this session right now, is that beating spots will be different on each of the drums. So it's a good idea to kind of have a good starting point, but then as you actually move through the different parts of the drum and different drums themselves, you will find different sweet spots. For example, on the top drum here on the 23, you'll find that actually playing a little closer to you, closer to the edge, creates a nice sound. So if I go moving backwards, now I was actually quite close on the top drum there. A nice top F, F sharp or G on the 23 sounds great when you come a little closer to the rim and you get a really nice brisk, fast roll. It really does sound nice. But as you move down into the bigger drums and lower sounding drums, you can actually move a little further into the drum and you don't have to work as hard or fast, certainly on the rolls. Okay, so that's just something to be aware of. Get into your rehearsal early and check those things out and the different beating spots on the drums. Now, we're whizzing through a lot of information here, but I want you to be able to just to get the highlights of things, and maybe you want to go back and watch some of this again and just sort of remind yourself of some of these things. But moving on to grips. Grips are really important. In the early stages of playing the instrument, I wouldn't be so concerned about how you're actually holding the sticks. I would encourage my students, if their first couple of lessons, first year of playing the timpani, I would encourage them to find something that is comfortable. And they get to know the instrument, and more importantly, they get to train their ears, because that's really, really important. But there are fundamental timpani grips that you should be aware of. And I'm just going to highlight some of them now and talk about the benefits of the particular grip that I use. So there's several grips. The French grip, there's the German grip, there's a Dutch grip now, there's even an American grip. So there's lots of different ways that we can hold the mallets, and it's really down to the individual to decide which one suits them the most, which is best, which is more comfortable, and also to have a preference in your head of what sort of sound you're trying to achieve. So for me, and I've talked a lot about articulation already today, I like to have a nice rhythmic, articulated approach to playing the timpani, particularly in a brass band. Now, when I played for Corey, they're a beast of a band. Okay, they can be a very loud band, or they can be a very very quiet band. I can tell you now, I've never played as quiet as I did with Corey, and also never had the demands to play as big and bold as I had to with Corey as well. So you need to be aware of the types of sounds and characteristics of the playing that is needed for the ensemble. So I found that the French grip for me was the best grip because I was getting a nice articulate approach on the drums, but I also had flexibility to get that nice sonorous roll when I wanted to. And we'll talk about rolls in a minute. But the flexibility of having that thumb on top of the stick and the fingers underneath, which helped me to create a nice articulate approach, but also the capability of playing a nice even and round roll. So just fundamentally with the French grip involves me having the thumb on top of the stick, like that. The thumb is on top of the stick and the first finger underneath to create that pivot point there. Okay, that's the fulcrum in that position there. And then the other fingers would just sit underneath like that. And so what I would do in my early days of practice, when I was getting used to this, and of course it's very different to playing the snare drum, which would be more like this, or even mallets, which would be more like this. But with the timpani, I'd have thumbs on top, and I would just start with a very basic hand-to-hand articulated pattern, looking for a sense of evenness on each of the hands, stick heights being as close as possible to being the same when I played. And I would just try and play as evenly and as natural as possible. So these are some of the exercises I might start with, just a hand-to-hand. Okay, so it's just a very simple exercise, but I would put myself behind a mirror and I would be able to see what I was playing. And you can do this on a drum pad as well, or a snare drum. I did loads of timpani technique practice on a snare drum, snares off, many years ago when I was practicing a lot more than I do now. But I could turn the snares off and I would have the mirror there and I'd look to making sure that my stick heights were exactly the same on both sides of my right and left sides. So that was always really important. And then I'd be looking at all times to get a natural rebound off of the drum. And I see this a lot with beginner players. They might go, and the stick would just stay here like that. Or even worse, the stick would stay in the drum like that. And what you're doing is you're cutting off the sound. You're stifling the sound. You're cutting the life and the breath of the sound straight out of the instrument. And that's not what we want to do at all. We want to release. We want to play the instrument. We want to prepare for the instrument, prepare for the stroke, play the instrument, and release. They're the three sorts of natural steps that we're looking to achieve. Okay? And then just to sort of help understand that, you can actually play the drum without holding the stick when it comes into contact. Just like that. And that demonstrates a affected sound. Okay, there's no contact sound. That's literally the stick playing the drum. And so when you're doing that, listen really carefully to the quality of that sound and try and replicate it when you're playing with the stick. Okay, really important. And that helps you to understand the sort of sound quality that you'll want to achieve. It needs to be as natural and as free sounding as possible. And then you'll want to do that between each of the drums. Okay. So we've talked about the hand-to-hand, those sort of fundamental strokes, and that's really the timpani player's most basic and important technique. It's not like playing mallet sometimes where we double up and we do two rights, we do two lefts, or snare drum when we're actually doubling. What we do with the timpani, and I explain this to my students, as much as possible, play hand to hand. Okay, it is the most natural sounding and physically natural way of playing the instrument. Hand to hand, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. Really, really important. Now, of course, there will be times in certain repertoire when you want to do something like this. So you want to go right, right, left. And that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine to do that. However, as much as possible, you want to be moving between right, left as much as possible. Okay, keeps a nice, even sound. Okay, and then double strokes are good to practice on the instrument. So we're talking about right, right, left, left, and not doing that really in a repertoire sense, but they are really good for practicing and warming up. So, and that also helps us when we go into playing roles as well. And then, of course, crossing over the drums. Another basic fundamental technique is obviously moving across, crossing over, and just trying to practice that moving in and around different ways of the drums. Get used to that because when you approach repertoire, you want to know which techniques to employ at which times. And I would encourage you to write in as you go, right, right, or right, left, whatever it might be, to help you just interpret your muscle memory and get to grips with the technical choices that you need to make for the repertoire. Okay, so I'm going to move on now and talk a little bit about tuning because I haven't mentioned that, and I've saved this for now because all of those other sort of basic techniques that we've talked about, you can practice on just two drums on any notes, essentially, in your practice situation. Obviously, I'd encourage you to tune to something like a C or a G or a D and an A because it sounds better. You're getting used to that common perfect fourth interval. But it's really now where tuning is a whole different topic. Now, we could spend a long time. I could spend all of this whole workshop talking about tuning, but I won't do. What I will do is talk about how I approach it. And if you're going into a situation in a band room with, say, it's CMI or your own core band, and really you have a limited amount of time to tune, perhaps, and you want to tune quickly, but you want to tune accurately. Now, it's important to note, and I've mentioned this at the beginning of the session, each of these drums are different sizes, and they have different ranges. Okay, so you would need to understand by your own practice and getting to know your drums which notes sound best on which drums. Okay, now usually the lower the drum, you want to play your lower notes, obviously, but sometimes you can, at the top of a bigger drum, say a C or a D on a 29, sounds brilliant because you get a lot of articulation without it sounding flabby. You know, that's on the top drum like this. So actually tuning your notes to the top part of the drums is often a good starting point. So a D and A on a 29 and a 32 sounds great. So that just helps you decide which pitches you're going to tune. And of course, on each of the drums, you have your indices. Now, these are the markers on each of the drums where you're going to decide where those indices go. Okay, you're going to decide based on your tuning where those indices go. And I'm going to show you now what I do in terms of tuning. I like to start out tuning the note A, a concert A. So if you're in the orchestra, for example, A is your starting note. The orchestra will tune to an A, okay? So often I've actually gone to the piano earlier and I found that A. There's another way. You can obviously have a tuning fork. You can bang it on your knee and listen to the tuning fork and play your A, and that would be your first note. Or you can have an electronic tuner which plays you an A. And I'm going to talk through now how I tune without using an electronic tuner because I believe you need to do that in the first instance. There are occasions where you'll want the help of an electronic tuner, but I'm going to talk about what I do without using one. Okay, so I've gone to the piano, I've played my A. So that might be my A. I like to sing my A, so I make sure that I've got that in my head. Now, I would find that A by going right to the bottom of this drum. I tune it right to its lowest point. Okay, I'm right down there like that. A is the note. Okay. So what I've done is I've tuned from the lowest point up to the A. And it's important that you can sing that note and hear it in your head. If you can't do that, you'll need to practice. Go to the piano, practice with that A, try and sing it back. Ask someone, is that in tune? You know, get them to, you can sing to each other and just find that A. It's really important that you be able to hear that. It's so important you can hear these pitches because when you're playing with anybody else, you're playing with other ensembles and any ensemble and playing with other instrumentalists, they're going to be playing lots of different pitches, and your pitch needs to fit in amongst the band in different situations. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get onto the musical excerpt. But you need to be able to hear your pitch so you can adjust it to what you know is in tune, but also what else is going on around the band or the orchestra. So you're absolutely tuned in to that pitch. So once I've got my A, I'm going to tune the fourth. Bom, beam, bum, 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 beam, bum, bum. So I would choose a song that maybe is a popular song that helps me with that interval of the fourth. Ba, 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 bum. Now that fourth is probably the most popular interval that you'll find for the timpani. Ba, 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 bum, ba, 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 bum, ba, 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 bum, ba, 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 bum, 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 bum. Okay, so then what I've done is I've got my A, and now I've tuned my D. So on the next drum up, I've got my D. Now from a D, what I do is I go down and I tune the fifth below that. So my D is bom, bom is the G. Bom, 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 bom. And again, I could choose a song. Dear Lord and Father, if mankind forgive our foolish ways. So I could just choose an interval. Okay, and now I have my G. So I have a D, a G, and an A. Now from the G, I could choose my C. I could actually find my C note. Bom, 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 bom. Now I've got a G, a C, an A, and a D. So from the C, I could then tune my top F on this drum. Again, that's a fourth. Yum, bum, 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 bum. I've got my top F here now, so I could go ahead and tune my bottom F and play the octaves. So I'm building up my different ranges around the drums, okay? So in the space of, 30 seconds, I've got C, G, C, A, D, A, F, F. I've got a G here, so I could then tune my G here and cross-reference it with my C on the 26. And then just check that those intervals match up around the drums. Now, this takes a lot of practice. You want to train your ears. And again, you want to reference it against the piano. You want to reference it against a tuner as you went through the whole process. But get used to doing it with your own ears because that's the way you have to adjust as you go through any performance. Now, some players will say, oh, no, I've tuned the drums. That's it now. We're good. And then you'll have, in a brass band situation, you might have 2 or 3 players in a concert come down and sit and play the drums. Okay, they'll come and sit and play timpani. And so a different player, different sets of ears, different repertoire, different environments, different situations throughout a concert. You'll need to adjust. So once you've set your indices to where you think your starting points are on the instrument, you've got to consistently keep adjusting your pitch. And you'll find that maybe if you're playing, say, a rhythmic passage with the cornets, say you've got a nice top F on the 26 here. Now, sometimes if you're playing with solo cornet soprano, they're going to play sharp when they play higher. So just be aware, you might have to actually move up a little bit in pitch as you play to match what's going on with the cornets. If you're playing with the basses and it's quiet, it might go flat. So you've just got to just be aware of it and change things. Hopefully the basses would be aware that they're getting flat and they would adjust, but just be aware that different tessituras of the instrument, different sounds in different places, different ranges, are going to create different tuning problems and intonation issues. So just be aware of that. When you set the drums, things are going to change, and you'll want to be aware of that. The other thing to be aware of when you are tuning is something called sympathetic resonance. And this is a way of just kind of confirming when you're playing the instrument, confirming some tuning basics. So if you're playing something like C and G, Now, as I play C, or let's go for G here, this 29 drum here is actually ringing. So it's giving me a combination of the G, which was just heard, but the C is ringing on this drum. And that's what we call sympathetic resonance. And that helps me, and I can listen really carefully. Now that's ringing nicely with a C. That helps me to understand that the harmonics of the instrument, the intonation of the instrument are in tune, are in sync with each other. The vibrations at those pitches are working really nicely together. And again, this is something I'd encourage you to do in the rehearsal room before it gets anyone through the door. I mean, if you're at a music school situation, or even a core band situation, you turn up somewhere to play and you've got to set up. Well, the first thing that happens is there's stands being set up, there's chairs being put out, the cornets are playing high, the trombones are playing loud, the horns are trying to get in tune, and all these things are going on around you. And actually what you want to do is have a completely silent room so you can go through those different stages of tuning the drums, working out where the sweet spots are on all the instruments, working out the intervals and making sure that things are in tune with each other, and then just being aware of the sticks and how you're going to lay things out. All of these things need to be done before the rehearsal starts, so it's nice and quiet. Because once people come in the room, they're not interested in what the timpanist is doing back there. And I've seen some people with a tuner, electric tuner, and they're playing really loud on the instrument, trying to tune the drums when a whole band are warming up in the room. That's just not going to help you. It's not a good idea. Get in early and tune the drums and be set. Okay, I'm just going to stop at this point. I think there's been a couple of questions that have come through. Before we move on to rolls and some damping and muffling, articulations and retuning, are there anything that I could help you out with right now?
Yeah, so I see that Bill Quick asked a question. He asked if you had any suggestions on how to clear a timpani head, get the pitch at each tuning screw for the same screw, the same for a pure tone or pure tune, right?
Yep.
Do you have any suggestions on that?
That's one of the real challenges, I think, for any player in maintaining the instruments. And whenever I've changed heads or I've tried to clear heads, what I do is I strip the whole thing down. So say I took this 32, I would, release all of the lugs, take everything off, take the head off, and I tend to do. I would put the head, say, put a new head on, or just clean up the old head. So I'd clean it down, physically wash it and clean it, and put it back on the drum, on the bowl. But what I would do is probably turn half or a quarter of a turn on the drum key, and then I'd start here at the one closest to me, and then I'd go opposite, and I'd do the same there, and then I'd go to this drum, onto this side here, to this lug, and then over to this one. So I would go opposites each way as I start building that drum head up, and then of course I'd go across from side to side here. So what you're doing is you're basically trying to bring things back up to pitch as even as possible. And I would set my pedal probably right in the at the top end of that pitch. So when I got to that point where the tuning was set, say at an A, then I would release the pedal and just check that the tension on the head was even as I went down various pitches. There's different devices as well that you can buy that sort of give you a very mechanical, precise level of how tight or how the tension of all of these different lugs as you go around the drum, which I have used, but I tend to try and do it manually because I can adjust it, and I'm always listening as well. The other thing to do is when you're doing that process and you've got the drum heads to a certain tight position, as you actually get some kind of resonance and pitch from it, is to go around the drum head like this. And just listen to each of those corners by the different lugs here and just check that they're in tune with each other. And you might find that, say, this here is a little sharper than over here on your tuning, on the A, the note you're trying to tune. Then I would just adjust it locally on that particular one. There are people that, if I have to do a complete refurbishment, or I have to go, if I want to change all of the heads and do a pretty major job, I tend to get someone in to do that because they're trained to do it and they have all the other bits of equipment that can help with that. And they obviously service all the other aspects of the instruments, the pedal action and the indices, the levers and everything around here, the gauges. They'll service all of that stuff. So I tend to get that done all in one go.
There's, I have some other questions, but time. I want us to be able to get to the music and things like that. So I say let's push on through, and if we
Okay,
have some
sure.
more time, we'll
Yep,
we'll go ahead and ask.
absolutely. And I just want to talk very briefly about roles. This is a big topic, and again, we could talk about it for a long time. But these are common techniques that I think that will come up in your playing as you go through. Now, as I explained, I play with French grip, so I have thumbs on top, and the benefit for that is that fingers sit nicely underneath, and I can get the fingers moving to aid the stick, and that's what we call finger rolls. So when I'm playing a roll, it's obviously right, left, but it's at its really quietest and fundamental point. What I'm using on my fingers to move the stick up and down. Now, some people will be doing this. Okay, so everything's really tight, and you'll see things. The whole wrists are coming up and the hands are coming up, and then you'll see something like this as well. But or even sometimes, which is like a snare drum roll. We want to avoid that at all costs unless it's a specific technique that's needed. But with the lower drums, I tend to roll slower. We talked a little bit about that, but the fingers doing a lot of the work. And then on the top drum here, nice and quick, and the fingers, but then obviously the arms come into it. But let me just explain. So if I'm playing a quiet roll and I'm going to get louder, I tend to just increase the intensity of what I'm doing. So I'm not actually, things aren't getting out of control. It's all very, contained. But I'm just trying to just increase, keep the fingers moving, but then I let the wrists come in when things get louder. Okay, so that's obviously something to practice with all your different sticks as you go through your different selection. And be aware, of course, that when you're playing quieter rolls, you can actually play a little slower sometimes, and you'll find a sweet spot on the instrument. You'll also find with some rolls and also with articulation and your damping and the influence of mallets playing different articulations, the conductor will often say to you, "Hey, I can't hear that. Play it with harder sticks." That's not always the case. Okay, you want to use sticks that you can control to create the articulation that the conductor or the band are asking for. And sometimes that just means playing a little louder. Sometimes it's playing closer together. You get a nice articulated sound by moving the sticks closer together. See, like that? It's a little bit more woolly as they go further apart. But often, conductors will say, "Oh, use harder sticks, use softer sticks." Try and ignore that to begin with and come up with you as the professional having a way to kind of interpret the information from the conductor and provide the response in your own way. I was once told by my teacher, and my teacher used to be, well, he still is, the timpanist of the London Mozart Players, and he's a percussionist on call with the London Symphony Orchestra. Great player, great guy, and he taught me a lot about the musicality of the instrument and the different sounds that are possible. And so just be aware, explore your own ideas with different sticks and different sounds, and just different ways of approaching the instrument, so you can produce the effect that is required. Often conductors don't know how to produce the sound that they want. So it's down to you to have the conversation maybe before rehearsal, after rehearsal. So, hey, what did you mean about that? You wanted more? Do you want it louder? Do you want it shorter? Do you want it articulated? Do you want it more distant? Do you want it closer? Let's talk through the effect that's needed, and then you can explore that. And the best conductors will understand that, and they'll be happy to have that conversation with you. Just briefly now, just finishing off this section before we move on to the excerpt. There's a lot that we can talk about in terms of damping. Sometimes we'll want to play sections of music, and you'll want to clear up certain sounds on certain drums. So I might go, because I don't want that sound there to be played through. So instead of, you hear both sounds ringing on there, both drums, I might want. So I'm going and damping the drums as I play those notes. So you'll work out when you're playing a piece of music harmonically if that A there, for example, needs to be damped, or that A, or the C, or the D, or whatever note you're playing. Just finally on damping, try to use all of your fingers and your thumb when you damp a note. Okay. Sometimes you can't because you're moving quickly, and you just get to use you might just have the 3 fingers there. But actually, the best damping that you can do is with one hand, the whole hand. So you put the stick up between the finger and your first finger there, and just stop the sound. And do it quickly, and it's going to stop that really nicely without creating too many excess sounds. Now, if we can just move on to the PDF of the excerpt that I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about briefly. Now, we're just going to probably spend 10, 15 minutes. I hope we don't mind just going over the hour just slightly, just to go through this. But here is the piece Corpus Christi by Robert Redhead. This is an iconic piece of music written in the early 1990s. And it was quite groundbreaking, actually, as a brass band composition for the Salvation Army. We'd had big pieces of music before, but there were some very unusual and different things that came about in this composition. And of course, the whole concept of this piece being the body of Christ was to bring in the different parts of the church, the different people, the bones, all the different elements of the church into one body. There was a lot of conflict in the early 90s about what style of music ministry was acceptable and was going to be taken forward in the Salvation Army. And so this piece was written to kind of try and embrace everybody and all of those ideas and kind of say we are one body of Christ, and we are better in the body of Christ when we all work together. And so we get to the end of this piece of music, and it brings in the song Give Thanks. And this is, I know this piece of music. If you don't know this piece of music, I would suggest to you that you go and listen to it. It's a fantastic listen. But it's great for the timpani. And I'm talking about section 234, just on the last page of this excerpt, because it involves all 4 drums of timpani. And you don't need to have 4 drums, but it's nice if you do. But what it does is it gives me the opportunity to explore some of the things that I've been talking about earlier in the workshop. So the first thing I do is actually get the music up, and I decide which drums are going to tune which notes on to start with. And I call that a tuning scheme. So I'd get the music, and I've written on my part here A, C, D, F. From left to right, A, C, D, F. So that's my starting point. A, C, D, F. Okay, that's my starting point for this excerpt. Now, I've looked at this, I've listened to it, so I've worked out where I'm going to make my changes. I've worked out which notes sound best on which drums. I've also worked out physically what's the most straightforward way of playing this, where I have to change the notes the least. And this takes time and experience, but you want to sit down and work it out. Then I'm going to look at the music itself and say, okay, what does this relate to? What am I playing, and how does it relate to the band? So actually what happens at 2, 3, 4 is it's the tune Give Thanks, and I actually have the words here. So what I do know is at 2, 3, 4 is that we have these words. And now let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich. So why does that relate to me? Well, you have let the say, I am. So bum, bum, bum. I am rich. I am strong. Okay, so that actually relates melodically, but also gives it some rhythmic impetus. So I'm aware of that in there. So when I'm approaching this, I want to be aware of those sorts of things. So what I'm going to suggest, can we go ahead now and just watch this excerpt? And this takes us to 258. So it's 233 to 258. And just take note of some of the things that I'm doing and how I'm relating to the music. And then we'll come back and just talk through a couple of points. Thank you. Yeah. So I hope that made some sense in terms of what I was playing in terms of the music. And you just had the melody in the background. I'm grateful to Aaron Jackson for playing that on the piano and helping us out with all the technology behind the scenes here. But what I tried to demonstrate there was obviously the tuning decisions that I made, the phrasing decisions that I made, and also looking at some of the ways that I interpreted what was on the music. One of those things that I just want to highlight right now are the rolls, for example. Now, a lot of the rolls, if you read them and played them just as they were written, you'd end up getting something like this. So everything kind of sounds monosyllabic, okay? But actually, what I want to do is give the front end of the roll a little kick with an accent and then just get out of the way, because the basses are doing all that sort of harmonic, sustained work for me. And my job as the timpanist is to color that and also be very rhythmic in its coloring as well. So I'm actually backing off, particularly when we get to the measure 2, 5, 1, 2, 3, 2, 5, 3, when what I'm doing here is so I'm actually just backing off. So I'm backing off, giving the front end of that sound and moving out of the way. Some considerations in this excerpt here, of course, is what else is the percussion section doing? Well, the snare drum is playing quite a consistent rhythmic passage. He or she is giving me the real sense of rhythm and rhythmic consistent clarity. So my job really is rhythm, but it's also color. All about color, augmenting what the basses are doing, the harmonic shifts, being aware of the harmony, how it moves through, and just keeping the notes alive all the way through. Now, timpanists, be aware, 1 before 258, when you've got that big row, you need to be glued to the conductor, okay? So you've got, okay? Because at that point, you've got to be doing exactly what he or she is asking you to do. And I've seen this before. Some people, in rehearsal more so, have just kind of gone, and they finished way before the band have even got there. So just be aware of things like that. That's a classic tuning in with the conductor thing. So yeah, there's a whole lot that I could talk about in this section of this excerpt, but hopefully I've covered some of those things. Are there any questions at this point just on this section right here before I just approach the ending? Okay, I'll take.
There hadn't been any questions. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So now I'm just going to talk about the last 2 lines of Corpus Christi. And this is an example of where you have a timpani solo. And if you're aware of Salvation Army brass band music, there wasn't really anything like this before. I mean, you'd had things like The Present Age, The Call of the Righteous. You'd have pieces like Song of the Eternal, where there were literally one bar or a couple of measures of solo timpani. But here you have an extended period of timpani solo, and you need to be aware. And this is, things that I would apply to any kind of solo work in any band situation. Know the score. Now I've got the score back here for Corpus Christi. I know that the band are playing fortissimo at 270. Okay, the band are really going hammer and tongs. We're heading towards the end. There's a lot of energy, but you'll look on my part, and I've got accents forte. So the band are going bam 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 boom 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 bum 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 bum, and I'm playing that solo there. But my job is not to match the volume and the dynamic of 270. My job is to match the intensity and the drive and the energy through my playing. So I might choose for this excerpt, I might try the flannels, for example. I'm just going to move this microphone a little bit. Because this gives me the weight without trying too hard. But I'm playing forte, but what I want to do is create accents and create articulation without overdoing it. And this applies to a lot of solos in a lot of pieces of music. Do not overdo it. Okay? So you've got bam, 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 bam. And it's that last one where we hit to go to 3 Fs is where you have a big push forward. So what I've done there, tried to just indicate that the tempo needs to be consistent. It needs to be driving forward. We're not holding back in any way. We're taking the band forward with us. But one of the key things to do here is to be absolutely balanced in your right and your left hand on this. You don't want to get that type of thing, because you'll get a really weak hand and it just doesn't sound very good. But then you'll get the top Fs as well. So you've got, to begin with, you're doing F and C. Then you get your F, F, F. So, and particularly on the Fs, you want to be as absolutely balanced as possible, because you want to make sure that you can differentiate between playing F and C earlier and all the Fs on that measure before the 4/4. And then just a little bit on the last measures there. The band come in with this huge chord after the general pause. So you come in with your accent, and you'll notice that there's actually not an accent on the very last note. So you get ba 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 bum. So I want to lengthen it, and I'm going to dare to not damp it for a little while as well. In a big concert hall, it's nice to have that top F just ring on a little bit. So you're going to have. So you might just let that top F just ring on a little bit, and that can be really, really big. And also, you'll need to make sure that you're together with the rest of the percussion section. There's a famous performance of this when the piece first came out. The ISB toured Australia, and I'm sure the guys won't mind me saying, but actually the percussion section finished after the band did. So always be aware that you're absolutely in the right place, but you're locked in with the percussion section and you're playing it together. It's really, really important. So yeah, there's a lot in this piece. In the beginning section of this piece, there's huge, big, fat rolls, and you can talk about balance and making sure that those tuning points are absolutely lined up with the rest of the band and that you're linked in together. It's really, really important. One final point, and I was going to, if we have time, I can certainly go on to the Call of the Righteous, but this sort of demonstrates a lot of my approach to playing sort of solo and the individual playing characteristics of the timpani within the band situation, is that you always need to be aware of what you're playing and what context it's in. Okay, don't take I mean, what's on the page is a guide. It really is. It's a starting point. It's somewhere where we can start our musical interpretation. But it's down to you as the player to bring the notes to life. It's down to you to make the thing work. And sometimes that means changing things. Sometimes that means adding things. I was very fortunate to play with, I think, probably the best conductor I've ever got the privilege to work with, and that's Philip Harper with the Corey Band. And Philip wasn't just a conductor, but he was a composer, and he had an insight to percussion because he would talk to us as a section. I remember he was writing a brand new piece of music, and he came to me and he said, "Nathan, I'm trying to write something for Indian sort of tabla music, and I want to put that into a brass band context, and I'm trying to create the kind of bon tabla sound." And this is a famous piece of music that we took to brass in concert a couple of years ago, a big competition in the north of England.
We're gonna have to stop. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'll finish on my little just effect. So the effect that we had for tabla drums is quite cool. And then we'd have some other effects as well, just added in there. But I'm sorry we've run out of time. I was hoping I could go on just a couple of minutes, but there's a lot of information, and I appreciate you taking it on board. And I do hope you're able to go back and watch it and cover some stuff again.
Yeah, I have in the chat. I've shared the link to the video that you used. If you don't mind leaving it up there, so if people want to look at that, and again, I sent the PDFs out so they can take some time to examine it and really look at what's happening a little more in depth. But I want to thank you for all your expertise today. This has been fabulous. It's been a great week. Boy, I wish we could have been live so that the kids would be able to get on the drums and work it into their band stuff and really apply it. So,
well, I'd love to be at CMI one year, and I heard a lot about it, and it's a great place, and you got some great kids there with a good heritage of brass banding. So it's great to be a part of it, and I'm very happy to help. And if you do have any questions and we can't take them now, then feel free to email me. Maybe you want to put my email address in the chat, and I'm very happy to follow anything up with the guys on the call.
And just thank you to all for coming today. It's been good to see you. Great job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to see you. Thank you.